Welcome back to the East Show, episode number 17. Once again, my name is Neil Ravin, and I serve as the Director of Communications for the Eastern Hockey League. And this week's guest, I want to welcome in Kevin Cunningham from the Connecticut Chiefs, the head coach and GM. What do you think of the league so far, Kevin?
We've been thrilled as an organization with the level of competitiveness, the pace of play. I think the way that we believe that it will prepare our players to continue to grow and develop as athletes, be challenged as young men, and ultimately move on to whatever the next step in their hockey careers. For our older guys, certainly direct to college, and for a couple of our younger guys, potentially continuing their junior career, maybe in another spot.
So, looking at each division in particular, is there anything that kind of surprised you about the EHL or the EHLP?
I think the EHL, I having with my experience as a college assistant, I feel like I had a pretty good grip on what the EHL would look like. To be honest, I was going in a bit blind in the EHLP. I've been really impressed with at the EHL level. I've been really impressed with the level of preparation that our opponents and everybody has for every game, and it's one of the things that I think sometimes gets lost in some leagues where there are some nights off. Like, we haven't had an easy game yet, and so it's been critically important that we're prepared. But I've been really impressed by how well our opponents have been prepared as well. And I think that the coaches work really hard to get their teams ready to play, to make sure that they prepare their teams to their strengths, and that they have some level of awareness of what their opponent's going to look like. At the EHLP level, like I said, coming in a little blind, I've been really impressed by especially some of the younger players in the league. I think there's some really talented kids, in that younger 2000 age group and the 2001 group that in some ways those kids are pups. They're really learning, and I think playing at that level can be really beneficial. It helps them gain some confidence, learn how to be a junior hockey player, the daily grind of it, and getting in the weight room and using video as a teaching tool, and some of the things that maybe they don't get quite as much exposure to at either the younger club level or high school level. And so I think that's been really it's been a lot of fun. Like, we've had a really good time with those kids as well.
So, looking at your rosters, we'll start with the EHL. Of course, I was just down there with you guys on Tuesday. I called your game against the Rough Riders. You scored 6 goals. All six, though, combined between Zach Withington and Kyle McEnany. So they've had some attention given to them throughout the year so far, being your top two scorers. Are there any guys in your EHL team that may not appear on the box score as much, but they should be players to watch, in your opinion, here as the season unfolds?
Oh, for sure. I think we've got a couple of guys that have been, as you said, a couple of guys have received some accolades. Scotty Lawson, player, I guess he's still the reigning player of the week, and he's been really good for us as well. But a guy like Joe Geary has been critical for us. He's played a ton of forward. He played a little bit of D because of injury the day that you were down, and he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's got one of the biggest hearts you'll ever see, and the guy competes for pucks, and he's critical on our forecheck. He's a huge part of our penalty kill. And his points are coming. He hasn't had them yet, but we know they're coming. A kid like Chris Bednar is kind of cut from the same cloth. He's a hardworking kid, great skater, really true natural center, wins face-offs, angles well, and does a lot of those things. Obviously, Kei Yasuda has been a big lift for us since we added him, and offensively he's put up some really good numbers, but he's also done a lot of the dirty work and a lot of the little things that maybe go unnoticed. And then on the back end, I think our two older guys have done a really, really good job. So Evan Burke and Ethan Schwartz have done a really nice job. Our D-core is young besides those guys. Everybody else is a 2000. And those guys have been, I think, a steadying influence. I think they've both played really, really well. I think Ethan's got a couple of points. I know Berkey doesn't yet, but I think he's playing his best hockey right now. He's coming off a weekend where I thought he was one of our better D men, and in subtle ways, not necessarily, overly overt ways, but ways that you'd come away as a coach saying really happy with how you played. And I think his teammates have really responded to that as well.
So that's your EHL team, and it's kind of similar EHLP. We just named Garth Swanson a Defenseman of the Week this past week. Curtis Briggs has received a few accolades throughout the year, but there's obviously a full roster behind them. Are there guys on that premier team that haven't got the recognition so far, but keep an eye on them as the season unfolds?
Absolutely, a kid like Owen Stacy, who's he's an 01. He's one of the pups I was probably referring to earlier. His experience is only high school hockey up to this point. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way towards high school hockey, but he hasn't been a part of he hasn't played Tier 1 hockey previously. He hasn't been in an environment where maybe he's been pushed to the degree rather that we've tried to push him, and he's done a really fantastic job. He's got a motor that is never off. He hunts pucks. He goes to the net hard. He creates scoring opportunities for himself and for his line mates, and he's done a really good job. Nate McDevitt is another forward on that team who's got a great motor and plays in the middle, so he's got some added defensive responsibilities. And I think those guys combined with Scott Bradley have really kind of clicked as a bit of a go-to line for us. And those guys have taken that on, that responsibility that comes along with that and the challenge that comes along with that. And they've been excited about it, and they've risen to the occasion. Those guys are playing their best hockey right now. On the back end, a kid like Cole Bepko is a guy we added a little bit late to the equation. But he's been fantastic. He scored some goals, and he's a physical presence, and he's a guy. He played in the EHLP last year with Apple Corps, so he brings a bit of experience and a know-how to get things done. He's been a really big lift for us.
So, kind of switching gears now off of that, we talked about your rosters. This is now my fourth year at the league, and I've developed a true appreciation for scheduling because I didn't realize, how much work went into that before I got this job a few years ago. And one thing I like to do once the season kind of unfolds is I take a look at each team's schedules, and there's always little things that just stand out to me. So, starting with your EHL team, you're now at a point where you have a showcase coming up. Obviously, you're going to be hosting it in December. You have 12 games between now and that holiday break for Christmas in December. 9 of those 12 games are in your building. Was that done on purpose, or is that just the way that it worked out?
A little bit by design, but you're also a bit at the mercy of your opponents and their openings. So, when I started to put our schedule together, a couple of things that were priorities for me were we knew we were going to have some players that saw action with both teams early on in the season. So the first thing that I wanted to do was we didn't want to play right away that second week in September. We wanted to start a bit later, let our team kind of gel. We added some guys late that were key adds for us to both teams. So incorporating them in what's going on, building a bit of a team culture, starting to lay the foundation of what we want Chief hockey to look like. And then, in the early part, I think for the first 3 or 4 weekends, I don't think our teams ever played right up against each other. One team was playing and the other team was off, so we were able to move some guys back and forth. And for those players that we knew were kind of on the bubble for us, they got a real opportunity to play a bit with both teams and gain an appreciation for it and understanding of the differences between the leagues and what their different roles might be, and then help them settle into a spot that fit them. We have 2 big stretches, I think, where the stretch you just mentioned where our EHL team is home for a long period of time. And when I knew that we were hosting a showcase, I'd be lying if I said I didn't try to set it up so that right before the break, we got a pretty good chunk of games at home. The number that we got was there was a bit of luck involved in that for sure. But then we also, I made a conscious effort to do the same thing with our P team towards the end of the season. So if you fast forward to the middle of February, I think their last 3 or 4 3.5 maybe weekends are all at home. So they
Yeah,
close
seven
with
games.
like six or yeah, 7 straight games at home. So that was as I saw those opportunities, I made sure that we moved on them and we got those things done. And I do think for both teams, there are reasons why those things can be advantageous for us. And I think we've played pretty well at home. I mean, we've had each team I think has had a stinker or two at home, but for the most part, I think our guys are pretty comfortable playing in our building, and it's something that we, as an organization, value the attempt at least to protect home ice.
And what's kind of unique about it is sometimes I see teams push to have more games at home before the holiday break because, sometimes the players are already thinking, you know what, I get 2 weeks off here. I'm just days away, and they don't check out completely, but a little bit. You know what I mean? And then, at
Sure,
the end of the
sure, no,
season,
absolutely.
you're at a point now where you're like, especially for your premier team right now, if the playoffs started today, you'd be the fourth seed in the playoffs, and to have in the back of your mind 7 straight games at home to end the year, that's going to be pretty comforting as we head towards this playoff stretch. But switching off of that to my final question for you, things have obviously started to pick up for your EHL and EHLP teams. The EHL teams coming off a stretch where you got back-to-back wins against the Rough Riders. Your premier teams won 3 of 4 games. It's still 5 months left to go though. It's a marathon. What are you most looking forward to, for the whole organization?
Just watching our guys grow and develop and challenge themselves and each other, and that's something that we talk about every day. Is it's one thing to have your coaches pushing and encouraging and bringing you out of your comfort zone a little bit, but it's even more powerful when your teammates are a big part of that. And so, we've really pushed our guys to be vocal about it, see something, say something, both good and bad. So if a guy turns a puck over high in the zone and he's coming back to the bench, it's not just a coach giving him a little grief for it. It's maybe a teammate or a line mate. And I think, the old adage that it's not part of your culture until your players recognize it and your players start to hold each other accountable is something that we very much believe in, and we're really starting to see. And I'm very happy with how both teams are playing right now, but we're far from satisfied with where we are. We want to keep getting better every day, and ultimately, we'd love to see both teams certainly at least contend for a playoff spot, and it would be great to see both teams make the playoffs. And then from my perspective, anything we do from that point on is we're playing with house money a little bit as a new team and a new organization. We'd be thrilled to have the opportunity to represent ourselves at that level.
Well, there you have it, folks. The Connecticut Chiefs, a brand new organization in the EHL this year. One to keep an eye on, that's for sure. The EHL team is off this weekend, but the EHLP team is taking on the Walpole Express, a 2-game set at home. You can catch those games live on Hockey TV. Thank you for your time, Kevin. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Neil. I appreciate it.